I'll be presenting a joint paper between myself and Professor Emer Smith, and we're looking at the transition to secondary school in Scotland. So most of all, we're really interested in group differences and difficulties in transitions to secondary school. So similarly to the other presentation, we ask what parts of family background have an effect on this. Does home learning environment, things like reading, learning, playing at home from an early age, does this explain these differences in family background? Does child engagement with school explain the differences as well? And what are the gender gaps in social background categories? And are they significant? So what's the point of studying school transitions? So in the paper, we argue that transitions to secondary school are a really, really good example of cumulative advantage. And it's from the perspective of recognition and support. So not cumulative advantage that we often think about in discussions of human capital or ability, rather the resources and the recognitions that children get in the early stages of their education. So there are lots of examples of this. So we know that growing up in poverty has lasting negative effects on children beyond their individual characteristics. We know that there are neighborhood effects as well, which play a part sometimes in children's outcomes. And again, these can't be explained by children's engagement in school or their ability. We know that poor transitions to education can affect learning outcomes. So that's why we kind of focus on this outcome. And we know that access to resources like books and formal childcare from really early age is associated with child outcomes, with good child outcomes. Although the exact mechanism behind this effect is up for debate. So on that last point, there is a wider discussion that Emer's highlighted already about home learning environment and child outcomes. The most important thing to remember here is that parental background still matters. So, mother's education is a particularly strong predictor of child outcomes, from reading to maths to their enjoyment of school. And access to resources is also a really strong predictor. And both of these things are really effective, and they can't be explained by the measure of home learning environment. However, there still is a positive association between home learning environment and child outcomes, and that effect is found in Scotland, it's found in England, it's found in Northern Ireland, and in some Irish data as well. One thing that does pop up quite a bit in all of these literatures is the importance of employment, the importance of parents' occupation, and the importance of pay. So that's something that we're going to try to bring into our presentation and into this paper, asking could earnings and pay play a part in predicting transitions to secondary school? So just a little bit about our methodology. We'll be focusing on sweeps 4, 5, 7, and 9 from Growing Up in Scotland data. And when we talk about difficulties in transition to secondary school, we're really looking at sweep 9, where the parents of the children are asked to evaluate how their child is fitting into the school. And then they give some subjective scores of how the kid is doing. And we take those scores and turn them into one score. And when we think about group differences, we will be estimating the differences between groups using ordinary least squares regression. So we do have a couple of controls that we're interested in, mainly gender and parents' background. And when we talk about parents' background, we're going to be thinking about income, we're going to be thinking about their class, and the parents' education, mostly the primary caretaker's education, which is mostly the mother. We also want to control for children's engagement with school, so whether they have an interest in subject, whether they enjoy school, and their home learning environment from a younger age. So did they read, did they count, did they play music at home? Very importantly, we check for who helps them do those things. Is it the parents, is it their grandparents? And we also look at the other activities that they might have done at home, such as going to the library, going to see friends, going to the park, things like that. And finally, because we know that environment is important and we don't want it to influence the other predictors, we'll control for the Carstairs environmental measure. So this is just what this transition score looks like in a distribution. We've split it up by gender, and we can see that boys tend to score a little bit higher than girls, and girls again tend to score a little bit lower than boys. So straight off the bat, we can see that there's a little bit of a gender difference in the score. And there is a tail with some extreme values where children have much higher score issues. We can split this score up by income quintile as well, and think about gender while we're doing that. So just thinking about the top quintile and the bottom quintile, we can see that children in the top income quintile, they tend to record lower scores than children in the bottom quintile, which suggests that those in the bottom quintile have more difficulty. And then within each quintile, we notice that girls on average tend to score a little bit lower than boys, although this is not always the case. So before I show you kind of the models that we have predicting these scores, I just want to give you a quick summary of how we break it down. It'll make looking at the charts that little bit easier later on. So we start with model 1, where we just look at income and gender. Then whenever the output is in red, we're going to be thinking about the background measures, the parental class, their education. Then when the model output looks green, we're going to add on top of that their home learning environment and whatever activities they do at home. And then finally, the yellow, we're going to be including school engagement. So the output looks like this, just to show you very quickly. But really, we're just moving from blue to yellow here, where we're gradually adding on explanatory variables to try to explain the differences in family background. So starting with parental income, straight away we can see that the top quintile and the fourth quintile, they're the least likely to record difficulties in transition. The other quintiles, they have much higher scores, and this difference is significant. Now, thinking of all of the measures that I discussed previously, excuse me, background, home learning environment, and school engagement, it really can't explain the differences between the top and everybody else. So even when we consider all of these measures, we still note that people at the bottom quintile, the second quintile, and the third, they record much higher difficulty scores than the top two quintiles. We find something similar when we look at gender. We note that on average, girls tend to score lower than boys, so they have an easier time transitioning to secondary school. Controlling for background and home learning environment doesn't really change this much at all, but controlling for school engagement seems to explain a big portion of the difference between boys and girls. So home learning environment, not that effective. School engagement, quite a lot more effective. And finally, I just want to show the results for parents' education. This set of results looks very similar to the results for income. So again, whenever the parents have degrees, when they have higher grades, and even vocational qualifications to some degree, they tend to record lower problems with transitions to secondary school. But parents with standard grades or no qualification at all, they have significantly higher scores in terms of difficulty. Again, the most important thing to remember is home learning environment and school engagement can't explain this gap. Actually, it does quite a poor job of explaining that gap. I should let you know that there's no blue dots here because this measure was only added in the second group of models. So just a quick recap of our main findings. We would argue that home learning environment and activities are not significant when predicting transition difficulty. We would also argue that income advantage cannot be explained by home learning environment, activities, attitudes to school, or engagement. And I guess that also applies to parental education as well, to a large degree. Gender differences are strong at first, but they substantially reduce when considering school engagement. And perhaps more importantly, background effects are not monotonic. And it seems like the least advantaged are kind of pitted against everyone else, in our findings at least. So what are the policy recommendations on this? It seems like parents with low incomes, routine employment, and unemployment can have wider effects on children. So their work environment can play a part. Work stability and income support may benefit not only workers but also their kids. Parents' education is an important predictor, but they need support to achieve educational attainment. So that's something to keep in mind. And encouraging parents to improve their home learning environment will likely have just minor effects on school transitions. But instead, if we protect families against poverty and deprivation, we might have a much larger effect on school transitions. So that's it. Thank you very much.